Hi everyone, I'm just continuing on from the last video. So when we look at the constellations, we have the seven Hathors, or the seven sisters, which is known as the Pleiades constellation. And it says here, in ancient Egypt, the star cluster we call the Pleiades was known as the celestial herd, and were an important part of the system of timekeeping and a seasonal marker associated with both the goddess Hathor and the Hathors. The milk symbolized the stars in the Milky Way, and the seven cows pour their nourishing milk represents the seven stars streaming the light of the Milky Way down our galactic arm to our solar system. The Milky Way as source of life. Now, this is kind of like the soma milk, soma drink as well, which can be used as a hallucinogen or a stairway to heaven in some ways, the hallucinogenic shamanic way to heaven or to the spirit realm. So the Pleiades, the celestial herd of ancient timekeepers. In the ancient Egypt, seven goddesses, represented by seven cows, compose the celestial herd that provides the nourishment to her worshippers. This herd is observed in the sky as a group of stars, the Pleiades, close to Aldebaran, the main star in the Taurus constellation. For many ancient populations, Pleiades were relevant stars, and their rising was marked as a special time of the year. In this paper, we will discuss the presence of the stars in ancient cultures. Moreover, we will report some results of archaeoastronomy on the role of timekeeping of these stars, results which show that for hunter-gatherers and Paleolithic times, they were linked to the seasonal cycle of Oroks. So Pleiades, the celestial herd of ancient timekeepers. So the Pleiades, also known as the Seven Sisters, the Pleiades are an open cluster in the constellation of Taurus. These stars are among the nearest star clusters and the most obvious to the naked eye. Blue stars observed through the faint nebulosity of a dust cloud in the interstellar medium, which the stars are currently passing through, dominate the cluster. The brightest star of the cluster are named for the seven sisters of Greek mythology, daughters of Atlas and Pleione. Pursued by Orion, they were rescued by Zeus, who immortalized the sisters by placing them in the sky. So due to a high visibility, these stars gained a special place in the many ancient cultures. They are winter stars in the northern hemisphere and summer stars in the southern hemisphere. We can tell that these stars were known since old times by several cultures all around the world, including the Maori and Australian Aborigines, Chinese, Maya and Aztec, and the native people of North America. The Pleiades are mentioned in Homer's Iliad and Odyssey. In the Greek myths, several of Olympian gods were engaged with the seven heavenly sisters. The Pleiades start to shine over the horizon and set in the west during October and November, the proper time of the year in the Mediterranean era to plough and sow the land. As prominent stars in Greek agriculture calendar, Hesiod, the poet who lived around 700 BC, mentions the Pleiades several times in his poem The Works and Days. The heliacal rising of a star or a constellation occurs when it becomes visible above the eastern horizon at dawn, after a period when it was hidden below the horizon. The corresponding rising of the celestial body above the eastern horizon at nightfall is its acronical rising. Constellations that rise and set were used for calendars by ancient people and used to form a zodiac. As highly visible heliacal stars, the Pleiades were among the most important celestial body after the moon, and used for a first astronomical conception. The Pleiades' heliacal rising was widely recognized in astral regions as the beginning of the new year and then of the agricultural season. To the Maori of New Zealand, their helical rising signifies the beginning of a new year. For the Bronze Age people of Europe, the Pleiades started to be associated with mourning and funerals. Between the autumn equinox and the winter solstice, the cluster rose in the eastern sky after the sunset. For Celtic populations, these stars were a window into the other world. Not surprisingly, this rising was coincident with a festival devoted to the remembrance of dead people. As a result of procession over the centuries, the Pleiades no longer mark the festival, but the association nevertheless persists. So the Nebra disk is usually considered one of the oldest representations of the Pleiades. An artifact dated 1600 BC, the dark bronze disk from Nebra in Germany, is usually considered as one of the oldest known representations of the sky, where Pleiades are top right. The disk is of the Bronze Age. As we shall see in the next section, there are many older paintings depicting the Pleiades in the sky. So I won't read this, but we have this painting of a bull in the French caves of Le Creux. Is it Le Creux cave? And it depicts the Pleiades above the bull. I'm going to play a video from Randell Carlson, and what's really interesting is the connection of, as they mentioned here, the Pleiades and the celebration of Halloween. And also in other cultures, the Day of the Dead. But first, I just want to read about Hathor and the Egyptians. So, the Egyptian season and 7 Hathors. The ancient Egyptians based their calendar on the helical rising of Sirius and devised a method for telling time during the night, method based on the helical rising of 36 stars, a star for each 10-degree segment of the 360-degree zodiac circle. The first of the 3 seasons of the ancient Egyptian calendar is the inundation season. This was the time of the Egyptian calendar year when the Nile waters flooded the farmland. The last month of this season is Atar. This name is a variant of Hathor, the goddess guardian of tombs. At Plutarch's time, Athar month was coincident with October-November. As for Celtic population, we have a connection with the other world. Known today by the Greek name Hathor, is the Egyptian patroness of lovers, the goddess of the sky, the protector of women and children, and beloved of both the living and the dead. Earliest references of this goddess date back to the 2nd dynasty. In art, she was often depicted with just the head or the whole body of a cow. The heavenly cow worshipped at the city of the dead at Thebes, she became the goddess of the dead. In Egyptian mythology, Hathor, in her form as the celestial cow, provides the substance to her worship. In earlier myths, Hathor was responsible for raising of the sun to the sky with her horn. So the name Hathor means the house of Horus in the zodiac, or the heavenly cow. It was during the Old Kingdom that she assumed the properties of an earlier bovine goddess, but she is also worshipped in the form of 7 Hathors. These 7 goddesses are the Pleiades shining in the sky, usually represented by 7 cows, often associated with a bull, as a heaven herd, providing the nourishment, bread, and beer of the underworld. We find again Taurus with Aldebaran. Its main red star is one of the most ancient group of stars, viewed as a constellation also in Egyptian area. As the 7 Hathors, she was the goddess often present at birth. Able to foretell the future, she was connected with the Nile, inundation and abundance of grain, the grain harvest. The 7 Hathors of the celestial herd were named in a spell of the Book of the Dead. Now I'm going to stop there because, when we think about Joseph's dream, the 7 cows, 7 fat cows, 7 lean cows, and that 7 years of plenty, 7 years of lean, and maybe it's because of this knowledge Joseph was able to interpret the dream, because the rising of the Pleiades was the indication of the beginning and the end of the harvest. So associating the cows, the goddess Hathor, with the Pleiades and the harvest and fat cows and lean cows is a pretty obvious interpretation of that dream, really, when you think about it. So I'm going to play some of this Randell Carlson discussion. I think that it's really important to our understanding of the end times and what happened in the days of Noah.
Welcome all to another episode of After School. I'm Randell Carlson, and for many years I have been researching the ancient origins of many of our modern customs, holidays, and celebrations. One that has particularly intrigued me is the origin and observance of Halloween. Join me as we explore the profound and mysterious celebration that has roots in an ancient, universal tradition of catastrophe that caused a true global reset. So, without further ado, let's take a dive down this primordial rabbit hole. Old English proverb, fire and water have no mercy. And of course, we know from myths and legends from all around the planet that there were two primary ways that the world was periodically destroyed, and it involved flood and fire. In the Greek terminology, flood was cataclysmos, from where we get the word cataclysm, and the destruction of the world by fire was ekperousis, the root of that term being pyro, meaning fire. And in some versions of it, the periodic destructions of the world alternated between one of fire and one of flood. We know that looking at the actual record, the geological record, the biological record, other proxy records of past changes, that there have been times when both fire and flood were involved almost simultaneously. I cite as an example the Younger Dryas boundary, the lower Younger Dryas boundary, that has preserves evidence of gigantic floods and also evidence of gigantic fires. All right. On Halloween, when the festival of the dead commenced, quote, the spirits of the dead wander more than at any other time of the year. This is a night when devils, witches, and other mischief-making beings are all abroad on their baleful midnight errands. This is a 19th century commentary on Halloween. And this is from the Encyclopedia Britannica, 1963 edition. In its strictly religious aspect, this occasion is known as the Vigil of Hallowmass or All Saints' Day. November 1st, observed by the Roman Catholic and Anglican churches. In Great Britain, Ireland, and the United States, ancient Halloween folk customs persist alongside the ecclesiastical observance. The occasion shows clear connections with the religion of the Druids in pre-Christian Ireland and Scotland. The Celtic year ended on October 31st, the eve of Samhain, and was celebrated with both religious and agrarian rites. For the Druids, Samhain was both the end of summer and a festival of the dead. The spirits of the dead were believed to visit their kinsmen in search of warmth and good cheer as winter approached. It was also an occasion when fairies, witches, and goblins terrified the populace. Bonfires were lighted on hilltops on the eve of Samhain. The tendency to manipulate rather than to celebrate folk festivals such as Halloween is characteristic of the 20th century. It reflects the growing influence of a rational outlook on life and the loss of interest in imagination and fantasy. The secular character of contemporary culture is also reflected in public neglect of the religious significance of Halloween, as well as in progressive loss of its folk vitality. Children are least affected by this disenchantment, and consequently, the more important folk occasions tend to be dominated by the young. Now, this quote kind of was a foretaste of this growing influence of the rational outlook on life that we saw expressed through the previous quote, that essentially denied to Halloween any significance at all. And yet here it is. Anyone who takes even the most cursory look at it realizes that it has this connection with the 3-day religious festival of All Hallows Eve, All Saints, and All Souls Day. So let's go on here. Here's another old tradition. This is quoted from the history of Halloween that was on the History Channel maybe a decade ago or so. If you put your clothes on inside out and walk backwards on Halloween night, you will see a witch flying in the sky at midnight. People used to believe that witches were the devil. The Day of the Dead, a universal tradition. This is from the work of Robert Grant Halliburton. Let's see, this is what Wikipedia says about him. He was a Canadian lawyer and an anthropologist. He became famous after founding the Canada First organization that saw English-Canadian society as the heirs of Aryan Northmen. So he was a bit of a racist, but that was normal back in those days. But he was a very extensive author who wrote numerous pamphlets, books. He gave addresses and papers in a variety of subjects. So anyways, we're going to be looking at one of the things that he did. This is from the New Materials for the History of Man, number 1, The Festival of the Dead. It was published in 1868. So having had rather unexpectedly to visit England in 1859, I thought it advisable to prepare a brief paper for the Society of Antiquaries of London, and accordingly selected customs connected with All Souls Day as a subject. On outlining it in England, it was apparent that the coincidences in the observance of this festival by different nations were much more striking than I had supposed. A new and most startling fact was discovered when I came to read over the paper I had prepared. It was singular that the Festival of the Dead amongst the ancient Peruvians was celebrated on the same day as by the Spaniards, that is, on All Souls Day, November 2nd. I had also considered this merely as a curious coincidence, but it was apparent on reading over the results of my investigations that the festival was generally observed in November south as well as north of the equator, a fact so remarkable that it was evident that whatever could be the cause, it must be something hitherto unknown. So, from 1859 until the present year, so this is 9 years later, all the leisure that could be spared from public and private engagements has been devoted to the inquiry. It was evident that the uniformity could not have been caused or been preserved by any calendar now known to us, and that the festival must originally have been regulated by some visible sign or mark that nature had supplied to our ancestors and the Peruvians. In European calendars, the last day of October and the first and second days of November are designated as the festivals of All Halloween, All Saints, and All Souls. Though they have hitherto never attracted any special attention, and have not been supposed to have been connected with each other, they originally constituted but one commemoration of 3 days' duration, known amongst all nations as the Festival of the Dead or the Feast of the Ancestors. It is now, or was formerly, observed at or near the beginning of November by The Peruvians, the Hindus, the Pacific Islanders, the people of the Tonga Islands, the Australians, the ancient Peruvians, the ancient Egyptians, the northern nations of Europe, and continued for 3 days among the Japanese, the Hindus, the Australians, the ancient Romans, and the ancient Egyptians. The startling fact that this feast was celebrated among the ancient Peruvians at the same period and on the same day that Christians solemnize the commemoration of the dead, at once drew my attention to the question, how was this uniformity in the time of observance preserved, not only in far distant quarters of the globe, but also through that vast lapse of time since the Indo-European first inherited this primeval festival from a common source? In the most ancient calendar in India, the year commenced in the month of November, which bears the name Cardigui, which means the Pleiades, a constellation which must, by its rising or setting at that time, once have regulated the primitive year. We find also that in the month of October, the Hindus, like ourselves, have 3 days which are connected with the festival of the dead. In the ancient Egyptian calendar, the same resemblance can be traced between the name of the Pleiades, which among the Hebrews and Chaldeans is Hathor, with that of the Egyptian month of November, which is Hathor. The Arab name for the Pleiades, Ataria, also suggests a resemblance. And I will suggest here that these names for the Pleiades, which I think you're seeing now, Hathor, the Hebrews and the Chaldeans, Hathor, Egyptian, and Ataria, Arabic. Now, if you look at the word Ataria here, what do you see here? Taur. Does that suggest anything? Does it? Yes, very good. Excellent. You get an attaboy for that. Halliburton goes on. Let us turn from the islands of the Pacific to Peru, and there we find the primitive calendar of 2 seasons marked by a New Year's festival of the dead occurring in November and celebrated at precisely the same time as in Europe and in Polynesia. The event in which it occurs, says Rivero, quotes, is called Ayamark, from Aya, a corpse, and Marca, carrying in arms, because they celebrated the solemn festival of the dead with tears, lugubrious songs, and plaintive music. It is worthy of remark that the feast was celebrated among the ancient Peruvians at the same period and on the same day that Christians solemnized the commemoration of the dead. Is it not somewhat startling to find that Australian savages at or near the time of Halloween, All Saints and All Souls also consecrate 3 days to the memory of the dead as a vernal New Year's celebration regulated by the time-honored Pleiades? And like the Northern Festival of the Dead beginning in the evening, or with a Halloween, in the Tonga Islands, which belong to the Fiji group, the festival of Anachi, a vernal first fruits celebration, and also a commemoration of the dead, takes place towards the end of October and commences at sunset. So here is a compilation of some of the partial list of ancient cultures observing a festival of the dead in late October, November. And you can see this down the left is the column of some of the, and this is not all inclusive either. But you'll be able to go over this on your own time and look at this. So, and here we go, another very important connection in all of this. A remarkable fact, however, was incidentally forced upon my attention, that the memory of the deluge was by the Mexicans, the Egyptians, and the Jews associated with the same time of the year and by the two latter nations as well as in Greece. And with that day I had found some very peculiar superstitions connected in the Pacific Islands as well as among most ancient nations. Among the Aztecs as well as the Egyptians, the deluge was commemorated at the beginning of the year of the Pleiades, when that constellation culminated at midnight. Now this is a very interesting connection, which brings us right back to something that the study of which I've been involved with for decades. And this is the myths and legends of the world-destroying floods, the Cataclysmos of the ancient Greeks, the Noahide flood of the ancient Hebrews, the Christians and the Muslims. And so now here we have some interesting connections. That the flood is celebrated as having occurred at this time of year. The universal ancient tradition, the Day of the Dead, celebrated at this time of year. As Halliburton points out, there must have been some commonality amongst this, something to bring this coincidence in time together around some event, which he assumed was a natural event, and then he learned that the Pleiades rises and culminates at midnight. It rises essentially at sundown in late October, early November, and by midnight it's culminating, it's crossing the local meridian. So if you're in the northern hemisphere, if you're facing due south, you would look directly above, depending on how high would be, depending on your latitude, but let's say at 45 degrees up, where the plane of the ecliptic is, we see the constellation of the Pleiades, which traditionally is placed at the shoulder of the bull, the shoulder of Taurus, the bull. And I think that this is going back even to the days of the Egyptians. We know that Taurus the bull was a recognized, defined constellation as long as 16,000 years ago, because we see it depicted on the cave paintings, with the Pleiades very distinctly shown as a cluster of stars. We now turn to Mexico, and there we find that the great festival of the Mexican cycle was held on the 17th of November and was regulated by the Pleiades. It began at sunset, and at midnight, as that constellation approached the zenith, a human victim was offered up to avert the dread calamity which they believed impended over the human race. This belief was so remarkable that I cannot omit a reference to it here. They had a tradition that at that time the world had been previously destroyed, and they dreaded lest a similar catastrophe would, at the end of a cycle, annihilate the human race. Greswell has devoted several chapters and much learning to the 17th day of November to show how remarkable a landmark it has always been through a long lapse of centuries. Even among the Persians, the same day was peculiarly venerated. In the ancient Persian calendar, the 17th day of November was held so sacred that all favors asked of rulers were granted on that day. So now we have this second date that's kind of get thrown into the mix, which initially might seem to complicate things, but once we begin to dive deeper into the details, we'll begin to understand exactly why we have this thing associated with October 31st, November 1st, and the significance of November 17th. Even tradition has been unable to preserve the history of this day that must be sought for in the very earliest ages of the world. In the mysteries of Isis, the goddess of agriculture and of death, the funereal part of the ceremonies, the lamentations and search for Osiris, which commenced on the 17th and ended on the 19th. Among the Greeks, besides existing in other ceremonies, the primeval festival of the dead appears under a veil of mythology in all the ancient mysteries, but above all, in the greatest of them, the Eleusinian. But now I'm going to show you something where I think you'll begin to see the interconnections here. So I want to call your attention first to the Torrids, which is the name of the meteor stream. Its cometary source, Comet Enki, and it peaks twice, once in late June and again in early November. Peaks from November 1st to November 3rd, approximately. And the radiant point of the Torrids is very near Pleiades in the shoulder of the bull. In fact, it's almost like a bullseye on the Pleiades. And so we have this correlation between one of the great meteor streams that has existed over thousands of years and a yearly festival that was part of both recognition of the ancestors and the Day of the Dead, and it's part of this constellation of the bull. Also, I want you to look just below the Torrids, and you'll see the Leonids. So there you've got the bull and you've got the lion, two of the creatures depicted, one half of the four creatures that represent the apocalypse, shown on tympanums of cathedrals, shown in many different forms, many different places as the bull, the lion, the eagle, and the man. But notice the Leonids, cometary source, Temple Tuttle, and you notice the date that they peak. So we have two of the great meteor streams peaking, each with these two dates. I think this is significant. So in The Great Pyramid, its Secrets and Mysteries Revealed by Piazza Smythe, written in 1880, we find this. Now hereupon we may all well wonder how it came about that, according to the invaluable researches of Mr. Robert G. Halliburton of Halifax, Nova Scotia, that amongst the origins of almost all nations, and among many unaltered savage tribes still, such as the Australians, Fijians, Mexicans, and many others, people never reached by the Greeks or Romans. A similar beginning of the year to that described by Virgil is still perpetuated. The Pleiades, or the star group, chiefly characterizing for those nations the constellation of Taurus, being annually appealed to for that purpose. And I have a quote here from Virgil. Let me just jump back to that. If I pronounce this anywhere near the correct pronunciation, Candidatus oratus apparet cum cornibus unum Taurus. The constellation of the white bull with the golden horns, which opens the year. And here we have the Pleiades. And in the next slide, we have a traditional depiction of Taurus the bull with the Pleiades occupying the shoulder of the bull. And here's an example of Taurus the bull with the Pleiades, not quite on the shoulder, but this painting has been dated to 14,500 BC, which is basically 16,500 years ago. Now, how remarkable is it when you think about it that, at least in this one case, the same constellation has, and the same depiction of that constellation as a bull, has existed or persisted for that long. And then we will begin to find lots of bull symbolism. And here we are facing south at approximately midnight from the eastern United States over the evening of Halloween, October 31st, November 1st. We're facing due south, and look what you've got right there, standing right on the local meridian, is the Pleiades, the shoulder of the bull, which has risen at sunset from the east culminates at midnight, and then sets in the west. And here you can see spring equinox. This is spring equinox on April 9th, 2300 BC. So 4,300 years ago. At the end of the age of Taurus, around the time of the Bronze Age collapse, this is what was going on in the sky. The spring equinox was transiting the Pleiades, the shoulder of the bull. Here's another depiction of the midnight sky on Halloween. Facing south from mid-latitudes, green line is local meridian. So sometime right around midnight, the Pleiades, moving from left to right, will transit the local meridian. Stansbury Hagar in 1931, he was an astronomer who was very interested in ancient traditions, ancient astronomical traditions. In the journal Popular Astronomy for August and September of 1931, he wrote an article called November Meteors in Maya and Mexican Tradition. Quote, before the arrival of the first Spaniards in Mexico over 400 years ago, and probably much earlier, in fact, I think I'm going to underline that for emphasis. The Mexicans told of certain stars called Zontamoc, or falling hairs, which fell from heaven to earth with the Lord of the Dead. Their fall was commemorated annually in the Cajoli festival, said to have been held towards the end of October. This festival and the falling of the stars was associated with the end of the world. The Lord of the Dead governed the festival of the dead preceding the Cajoli, during which the spirits of the dead were supposed to return to earth from the land of souls in the sky. No doubt they were believed to have been accompanied by their deity, whose fall is mentioned in the ritual. On sheet 8 of the Mexican Vaticanus 3773, and in the Borgian and other codices, these stars of the falling hairs are depicted falling from the sky to the earth, accompanied by many other stars, further identified by the conventional stars beside them. So here's an example of Zontamoc, the fallen god. Note the rattlesnake glyph in the lower right-hand corner. To the Mexicans, the ancient Mexicans, the rattlesnake glyph was a symbol for the Pleiades. Now, let's consider what we've got here. Notice the Lord of the Dead. He's falling to earth, and he's accompanied by other falling stars. So I think right here now we've already begun to see very explicitly what this is leading us towards. Now, the rattlesnake, what is one of the characteristics of the rattlesnake? They can bite you, they can inject you with poison, they can kill you. But they usually give you warning, don't they? Yeah. The Vaticanus Codex antedates the entrance of the first Spaniards into Mexico and depicts traditions much older than that date. From these facts, it seems reasonably certain that the Zontamoc were November meteors, whose falling hair referred to the fiery trails left behind them. But the Mexicans seem to have distinguished between the different meteor groups, for they refer to the fall of a Zontamoc on the day one eagle, which pertains to Taurus, and would seem, therefore, to refer to Torrid meteors. The end of the world would naturally be associated with the memory of one of the great meteoric showers during November, when all the stars seem to fall from the sky. Hagar continued, at Akansa, in the Yucatan, a Maya zodiac was placed on the stucco facade of a mound, probably long prior to the coming of the Spaniards. It was probably at least 600 years old when it was exhumed. On this zodiac, which represents the signs in regular sequence, The position of Taurus is occupied by two panels, the lower of which represents the rattle of a snake. It is Tzabek, the rattle asterism, our Pleiades. The upper panel contains a down-flying, semi-human or ape-like figure. Beside his tail are star symbols, and above his head spears or arrows, implements of war, which in the Kaholi festival represent the end of the world, marked by the fall of the Zantamach. This Maya figure also probably refers to a Torrid meteor emanating from Taurus in November, when that asterism is near the meridian. And so here we see from that stucco facade, we see the diving monkey figure on the stucco relief. Here's the rattlesnake glyph. Up here, this is interesting because associated with this God falling to earth, this is the great urn being overturned and pouring out the waters of the flood onto the earth. And here is a Christian depiction of the same ideal, but in this case it's Lucifer, bound and falling. This is in Roslyn Chapel. And this opens up some other completely alternate meanings for the identity of Lucifer. Many depictions on cathedrals, medieval cathedrals, have diving figures. The skydiver from Autun Cathedral. Here we have from the Dresden Codex a torch-bearing dog or beast beneath a celestial dragon strip. Two torches, one pointing down towards the earth, flaming torches, I should point out. One, the flaming torch is directed towards the earth, the other it's directed towards the sky. And here we have ancient Roman traditions, Mithraeus, from the Mithraic traditions, and these were the two torchbearers that were seen to accompany the god Mithras, and they always held each a torch, one pointed up towards the sky, the other one pointed down towards the earth. So let's talk a little bit about the Torrid meteor stream. We won't go into a lot of this. We'll skip over some of this. These are accounts of encounters with the Torrid meteor stream. I'll start with some work by astronomer Fred Whipple, published in 1948. It was the first photographic meteor studies, and this was he focused on the Torrid shower. This was published in the Proceedings of the American Philosophical Society, 1940. The present paper is a study of 14 meteors photographed at the northern stations of the Harvard Observatory, 13 photographed in 1937 and one in 1938. The meteors all belong to or are associated with the Torrid shower. The total interval of the shower, as covered by the present observations, is from October 26th to November 22nd, nearly a month. Now, this is because the stream itself is very diffuse, which is a characteristic of old meteor streams because stuff gets spread out. But still, it peaks those 3 days, late October and early November. But for the Earth to entirely cross the whole stream, it goes all the way up to the 22nd of November. This unusual persistence of the Torrid shower, coupled with the slow daily motion of the radiant, has led Knopf and Hofmeister to conclude that the shower orbits are hyperbolic about the sun. But the present observations show that the orbits are closed and of short period. There have previously been few data concerning the variation of meteor orbits with position within a stream. Because the Torrid shower provides such data, the observations are discussed in some detail, and the stream identified in origin with Enki's comet. Now, here's the significance of what Whipple discovered. Was he essentially took photographic studies of these meteors as they're moving forward through their orbits, which, as he says here, the original view was that they were hyperbolic. Now, hyperbolic means that it's open-ended. So if it's open-ended, that means meteors are coming in, going out, and they're not returning. The significance of Whipple's work showed, as he says here, let me go forward to this one. As he says here, the present observation showed that the orbits are closed and of short period. In other words, they're not hyperbolic, they're elliptical. So elliptical means short period, they're going to be coming back regularly. And in fact, it works out to be about a little bit more than 3 years. Now, what he did was once you take these photographs, the meteors are tracing out the geometric path of the ellipse. So you can now take these 14 meteors, and if you have enough positions as they're moving forward in the sky, you can now play it in reverse. Right? Each meteor is within this stream but has a slightly distinct orbit from the other meteors. But when you play them in reverse, what happens is those meteors all converge on the same point in space, which tells you that they're fragmentations of an object that was once a single object. Further, if you trace that back, it converges on the same point in space occupied by comet Enki, which tells you, oh, this was byproduct of the disintegration of a disintegration event involving comet Enki. Let's look at the next graphic here. This shows a radiant point in space. There's two things to appreciate here. The meteors are actually coming in parallel lines, like you see in the graphic below. But when you look at them from our perspective, you don't see parallel lines. They all seem to be emanating from a point. Just think about you've ever walked down a railroad track or anything where you've had that kind of perspective, or a downtown street where the buildings seem to be converging in the distance. You know that they're not really converging. They're parallel. The perspective, the convergence is an illusion of perspective. And so you can imagine almost like when the Earth is passing through a meteor stream, it's almost like the planet is passing through a tunnel. And the meteors, which ultimately emanated from the disintegration of some parent or progenitor comet, are flying along in more or less parallel lines. We're passing through, and as we look upstream, what we see is this radiant point, the point from which the meteors appear to be emanating in space. The meteors of the Torrid stream are not actually coming from the Pleiades. It's an illusion of perspective, but it's a very natural way to associate that point in space where the meteors appear to be emanating with the particular star groupings that fall, that are in line with that point. Does that make sense? Good. Okay. And here's an actual time-lapse photograph of the Leonid meteor shower looking towards the radiant. And so you can see here, if you were to take these meteors and draw them back, you would see that they all converge on this point here that's very close to the star Regulus, which is in the constellation of Leo. And this event peaks on November 17th. So here we have a graphic. And this graphic shows the orbit of two Torrid meteors. Now, these two particular meteors sort of lie on the outside range of the stream. They're like near the shoreline of the stream. So what you can get by tracking the orbits of these two Torrid meteors is more or less the region in space that's occupied by the stream. So if we look at this graphic, you'll notice here the sun at the center, and then you'll see Mercury, and you'll see the Earth right here, and then you'll see, that's Venus. Here's Mercury, the inner circle, then Venus, then the Earth, and then we have Mars. And so what you can see here with the meteor stream is that the meteors are moving this way, the way the arrows. So the arrows are showing the orbits of the planets in that direction. It's like as if we're looking from above down on the solar system. The Torrid stream is also moving more or less in the same direction. Now you see these lines here extending from its most distal point from its orbit around the sun, which is called the aphelion, and its closest point called the perihelion. And you can see that the meteors would be coming in this way, past perihelion right here, and then continue back out like this, almost to the orbit of Jupiter, and then they begin to fall back, towards the sun, and they're doing this about every 3 to 3.5 years, right in here. So now let's go to the next slide, and I've kind of shown some more additional detail. So here's Earth's orbit. Now what you can see from this is Earth is crossing the stream twice, right? One time as it's coming from around the sun, and again as it's coming in towards the sun. So at this point, at this crossing, the meteors are going to be difficult to see. The reason? Well, because they're coming from the direction of the sun. So you'd almost have to be looking into the sun to see them, right? Now, this happens June 30th. Now, before we come around, do you know a significant event that happened on June 30th? You've heard of Tunguska. A meteorite came in and blew up in the Siberian atmosphere about 5 miles above the ground. And it happened on June 30th. And guess what? The direction it came from? Well, it was not seen until the last minute because it appeared to be coming directly from the sun. And in fact, some of the eyewitnesses who first saw it commented things like, said it looked like it was being born out of the sun or disgorged from the sun. So the Tunguska event of 1908 that blew up in the Siberian atmosphere 5 miles above the ground with the force of a 15 to 20 megaton hydrogen bomb, utterly devastated about 820 square miles of old-growth taiga forest, completely scorched and incinerated about 200 square miles of that same forest directly under the epicenter, left scars that were still there 20 years later that were finally discovered and investigated by scientists. Given the timing and the placement, both being consistent with that object being a member of the Torrid stream. In other words, the summertime Torrids were at the peak of the summertime Torrids, crossing that stream, and it's coming directly out of the sky from that point in space where the stream would be emanating. Now, we come on around. Earth is moving this way through its orbit. This is in June. So now you're going through the summer. You come around, you're into the fall, and here we are at November 1st. And now, if you happen to look up the stream on that day, you're looking in the direction of this green arrow directly towards the Pleiades. You begin to get to see the geometry here of how this works. So now we get to the work of Victor Klube and Bill Napier, The Cosmic Winter, published in 1990. As noted, very few comets present any danger to the Earth, but the occasional giant comet that is trapped in an Earth-crossing orbit of short period rapidly develops in such a manner as to intermittently generate a substantial swarm of bodies, which are commonly asteroidal. The giant comets recur at intervals of about 100,000 years during a shower, whilst the terrestrial encounters with the asteroidal swarms, which may continue for a century or two, recur at intervals of about a millennium. Between the 3rd and 15th of November each year, the Earth runs through a meteor stream coming from a small area in the constellation of Taurus the Bull. A young stream made up of meteors not long released from their parent comet would be narrow and probably strong, and the Earth would pass through it in half a day or so. The Geminid meteor stream is one such, the Earth encountering it on the 10th of December each year and the shower being over by the 12th of December. The Torrid meteor stream, on the other hand, takes the Earth 12 days to cross, and it is not very intense. It looks old. It has two main branches, northern and southern, emerging from slightly different parts of the constellations, the branches being about equal intensity. Orbiting with the Torrid meteor stream is a small comet, discovered in 1818 by Pons. An orbit was calculated for this comet by Johann Enki, a pupil of the famous mathematician Gauss, who had developed a method for calculating the orbits of bodies from their movement across the sky. There are about 100 known short periods of comets. All of these, with the sole exception of Enki's comet, are in orbits which sooner or later lead to a close encounter with Jupiter and ejection from the solar system by the powerful gravitational pull of that planet. But Enki's comet has somehow established itself in a stable orbit, such that it never comes within the Jovian sphere of influence. It does, however, come close to Earth. In addition, there may be 1,000 or 2,000 asteroids over a kilometer across in orbits which make them a potential collision hazard with the Earth. None is more than about 10 kilometers across, their surfaces extremely dark, and fewer than 50 have been discovered. They are known as Apollo asteroids, after the prototype discovered in 1932. Enki's comet is, in fact, the sole example of an active comet in an Apollo orbit. The orbit is highly elongated, and the comet may approach to within 0.34 astronomical units of the Sun, and go out to 4.1 astronomical units. The comet's orbit is inclined at only 12 degrees to that of the Earth's. This low inclination and the shortness of the orbital period ensure that there is frequent interaction between the Earth and the material of the Torrid stream, and the potential for occasional, very close encounters with Enki's comet. On the face of it, then, the Torrids seem to be an elderly, diffuse meteor stream with no peculiar characteristics other than their association with a comet in an unusual orbit and just too faint to be seen with the naked eye. There is much more to the Torrid stream, however, than this. In a study of fireball records from the 1st to the 15th centuries A.D., the astronomers Astapovich and Taranteva found that the fireball flux from the Torrids was much more intense 1,000 years ago. The Soviet astronomers found the Torrids were the most powerful shower of the year in the 11th century, with 42 fireballs belonging to them, and no shower, not even the great ones, could be compared with them as to activity. In the not-too-distant past, therefore, the Torrids were revealing themselves as outstanding performers in the night sky. Two recent discoveries confirm the suspicion that the stream is a remarkable one. The first of these is that amongst the 80 or so known Apollos, 6 or 7 are orbiting within the Torrid meteor stream. There are some interesting objects. Hephaestus, for example, is the largest known Apollo asteroid, being about 10 kilometers in diameter. Its orbit closely resembles that of the comets. Then there is Oljato, a dark asteroid about 1.5 kilometers across. Now, it is very unlikely that these bodies are the only ones orbiting within the Torrid meteors. Discovery of the Apollo asteroids as a whole is only about 5% complete. We are therefore led to the remarkable conclusion that there are between 1 and 200 asteroids of more than a kilometer diameter orbiting within the Torrid meteor stream. It seems clear that we are looking at debris from the breakup of an extremely large object. From Meteorite Falls in June, 2 sets of observations which appeared in the Journal of Geophysical Research in 1996, and this is from the abstract. Two types of meteoritic events are associated with the calendric period June 13th through 30th. One is an excess of falls of certain basaltic meteors. These comprise a new subgrouping of achondrites, whose lithologies suggest possibly similar pre-terrestrial histories. Historical high-energy impact-like events on the Earth and the Moon have also occurred in late June. In addition to the much-studied events in 1178, 1908, the Tunguska event, and 1975, these include an impact-like lunar event known to Islamic scholars, whose occurrence in 617 AD may have been June 26th or 27th. The Torrids are an annual meteor shower associated with the comet Enki. They are named after the constellation Taurus, where they are seen to come from the sky. Because of their occurrence in late October and early November, they are also called Halloween fireballs. Enki and the Torrids are believed to be remnants of a much larger comet, which has disintegrated over the past 20 to 30,000 years, breaking into several pieces and releasing material by normal cometary activity or perhaps occasionally by close encounters with the gravitational field of Earth or other planets. In total, this stream of matter is the largest in the inner solar system. Due to the stream's size, the Earth takes several weeks to pass through it, causing an extended period of meteor activity compared with the much smaller periods of activity in other showers. So here we have the Mithraic tradition. Now, we've got Mithras here. He's accompanied by 7 stars. Those 7 stars traditionally represent the Pleiades. You'll notice what he's doing. He's turning and he's looking back towards the sun god, but what he's really looking at is the raven, or in some cases an eagle, who is considered to be the messenger of the gods. There are 2 torchbearers. There was a reconstruction of this that was done, and it was mistaken because one of the torchbearers was supposed to be holding his torch pointing towards the sky and one towards the ground. But notice what Mithras is doing. He's stabbing the bull in his shoulder, and fluid, but presumably blood, is flowing forth from the shoulder. Now, there's a whole lot going on in this bas-relief here, way beyond what we would talk about in this context. But here's Europa being abducted by Zeus in the form of a white bull. You notice the torchbearer here also. Note Mithraic elements. This is from a wall painting found in Rome. The important thing here, notice she's about to stab the bull in the shoulder, Europa. Here is a chariot with steeds. This represents Phaeton's chariot. You remember the myth of Phaeton? But very briefly, Phaeton was the son of Helios, the sun god, and he was able to persuade his father to let him drive the chariot of the sun. But the chariot of the sun, he was not able to control it because of the power of the great steeds pulling it, and they veered off the road, which was the pathway of the sun, through the signs of the zodiac along the ecliptic, and the chariot began to descend to earth, and it set the earth on fire. So in this particular painting, they're showing the Phaeton chariot. He's holding something in his hand here, which I interpret to be the bolide. And then down here, what's happening here? You got Poseidon. He's overturning the urn, and the waters of the great flood are spilling out on the earth. So in this particular painting, each of these events is being associated. The abduction of Europa, the stabbing of the bull in the shoulder, the torchbearer, the Phaeton myth, and then the great deluge. The Peruvians had several flood stories. One of them refers to a flood accompanied by an eclipse of the sun lasting 5 days. All living things were destroyed except a shepherd and his family, etc. Some time before he had noticed that his flock of llamas looked sad and seemed to be studying the stars. On inquiring from them, they pointed to 6 stars close together and declared that they were a sign that the world would shortly be destroyed by a deluge. He thereupon collected his llamas and his children and took them to the summit of the mountain Ankesmarka, to where a crowd of other animals had already sought safety. Scarcely had they reached the summit when the sea broke its bounds and rushed over the land. The Eve of the Deluge. This painting is very interesting, and it makes some wonder about some of these artists and where they got their inspiration from. This is the Eve of the Deluge, of course, the Great Flood, right? And these are the antediluvian patriarchs here. Reclining back is Methuselah, and one of the patriarchs, probably Enoch, is pointing to the omen in the sky, which is the great comet. And that the appearance of this great comet in the sky is indicative of the impending flood that's about to destroy the world. Isaac Asimov in 1979 speculating a meteor might have caused the flood. Geological confirmation, George Friedrich Wright, geological confirmation of the Noachian deluge. And this thing, the Assyrian clay tablet discovered by Sir Austin Henry Layard in 1858 in Iraq, believed to be a 700 BC copy of an older Sumerian astronomical text from several thousand years BC. And here's that appeared in the UK Telegraph March 31st, 2008 by their science correspondent. Clay tablet holds clue to asteroid mystery. British scientists have deciphered a mysterious ancient clay tablet and believe they have solved a riddle over a giant asteroid impact more than 5,000 years ago. Now researchers say their translation of symbols on a star map from an ancient civilization includes notes on a mile-wide asteroid that later hit Earth, which could have caused tens of thousands of deaths. The circular clay tablet was discovered 150 years ago by Sir Austin Henry Layard, a leading Victorian archaeologist, in the remains of the royal palace at Nineveh, the capital of ancient Assyria, what is now Iraq. The tablet, on display at the British Museum, shows drawings of constellations and pictogram-based text known as cuneiform, used by Sumerians, the earliest civilization in the world. Now, Alan Bond, the managing director of a space propulsion company, Reaction Engines, and Mark Hempsell, a senior lecturer in astronautics at Bristol University, have cracked the cuneiform code and used a computer program that can reconstruct the night sky thousands of years ago to provide a new explanation. They believe their calculations prove the tablet, a copy made by an Assyrian scribe around 700 BC, is a Sumerian astronomer's notebook recording events in the sky on June 29th, 3123 BC, which would, of course, put it right in the time slot of the Torrids. And then Arabic traditions concerning the Great Flood. Surid, one of the kings of Egypt before the flood, built 2 great pyramids. The reason, this is from Masudi, the Field of Gold Mines and Gems, written around 930 AD. The reason for building the pyramids was that the king, who lived 300 years before the flood, once dreamt that the earth was twisted around, the stars fell from the sky and clashed together with a great noise, and that all mankind took refuge in terror. The king Masudi then relates, summoned his interpreters of dreams. The best of them reported that he had had a parallel dream about a year earlier and was told in it that after the disaster, the firmament would return to its former site. Upon being told that afterwards Egypt would flourish again, the king ordered the pyramids to be built. According to Masudi, they were filled with the knowledge of the secret sciences, everything known of mathematics, astronomy, and geometry, and other wonders and treasures. Which is a bit of an interesting aside. A comet has a long tail and is thus commonly called a broom star. The ancients believed it was a symbol of war and calamity. Their appearances heralded wars and disasters for humankind, and ancient people were afraid of seeing them. People who bring misfortune or bad luck may also be called broom stars. So you can see people here taking refuge from the broom star that appears in the sky. 612, this was one of the first comets reported in more than one Chinese historical text. Let's see, the text said a broom star entered the Big Dipper sometime during the month of 612, August 4th to September 2nd. The ch'un, however it's pronounced. Then as a broom sweeps away what is old to give place to something new, a comet is supposed to presage changes. So this idea of the comet as a broom star is seen in this drawing from Theatricum Cometicum 1666 by Stanislaw Lubyaniki. The broom star sweeping away the old. Now notice as the broom star passes overhead in the sky, it leaves dark, turbulent weather behind with lightning bolts coming down, the destruction of buildings, and the outbreak of great fires. So there's Comet West, and impressive. You can see how people could have likened a comet in the sky to a broom. So here's a witch-like cometary apparition destroying the earth. And there's a traditional witch flying in front of the moon. And then here's the quote that we opened with. If you put your clothes on inside out and walk backwards outside on Halloween night, you will see a witch flying in the sky at midnight. Now think about this. What have we just learned? If you go outside at midnight on Halloween, whether you're walking backwards or not, the witch in the sky will be the Pleiades with the Torrid meteor stream. That's what you'll see. So then again, here's the radiant of the Torrid meteor stream, the Pleiades right there, and this would be Halloween night. And then another depiction of Mithras. And here's the radiant of the Torrid meteor stream superimposed on the bull. I go back to this because, again, the bull is being stabbed in the shoulder, which traditionally is exactly where the Pleiades are. And then as a consequence of that stabbing in the shoulder, we have the blood of the bull pouring forth and pouring down to the earth. I think what we've shown here is the possibility that there's a much deeper meaning to Halloween.
Okay, so I think it's important to note, I've spoken about this in previous talks about Hathor and the planet Nibiru. And so now we have this connection with Hathor and the Pleiades. We also have a connection with Hathor and the planet Venus. And it says here in this article, Hathor and planet Venus revealed by the Akhet sign. Now, I've read this article before from Gigal, and she says here, Hathor was not only responsible for the yearly inundation of the Nile, she was named also Great Flood for the universal Big Flood. Hathor was so angry that people were disobedient to God that she became Sekhmet, war goddess of Upper Egypt, to destroy the people, sending fire and big floods on earth. We must not forget that the name Hathor is Greek corruption of the Egyptian variant Het, Hurt, the house above. And then Het or Heru, the house of Horus. Hathor is also known as the Lady to the limit, meaning the edges of the known universe. Planet Venus equals Hathor equals Nebheru or Nibiru. And in ancient Egyptian Nebheru or Nebheru, house of Horus, Venus was known to have had different places in the solar system in the past before stabilizing. In all ancient Egyptian texts referring to ancient times, we speak of the eye associated with the word planet. All of this occurred after the death of Osiris, father of Horus, fragmented into pieces. In all ancient Egyptian texts referring to ancient times, we speak of the eye as associated with the word planet. Hathor was the wanderer planet who created the panic and major damage to humans at certain times in agreement with God due to the impiety of men. Venus was then considered a new bright sun, which seemed to go back and forth to Earth throughout times. So the so-called Nibiru is not another planet, it is Venus in the past according to the ancient Egyptians. So there are no Sumerian tablet that talks about Nibiru. They do not exist. Many people for years asked Sumerian translator Sitchin to point out to them where the Sumerian tablets, the reference to Nibiru are, but he never gave them this information. In addition, the name used in the documented tablets to identify original home of the Anunnaki is Duku, which means the sacred mount. It has nothing to do with the word Nibiru. Instead, the writers of the Sumerian tablets speak of supreme constellation, i.e. the Pleiades. So is the sacred mount Mount Meru, or is that the man of the mountain? So this is a depiction of Hathor, her symbol here, her hair, Hathor's hair curls, the path of Venus, planet inside the solar system in the past, as well as the horns of the sacred cow, another symbol of Hathor. So this is really interesting when we put into context what Randell Carlson's talking about, that the Torrid meteor shower is what caused the deluge. And, I think then we look at Immanuel Velikovsky and that Venus was a wandering planet that entered our solar system and then eventually stabilized around our sun. So in Immanuel Velikovsky's book Worlds in Collision, published in 1950, the book postulates that at around the 15th century BC, the planet Venus was ejected from Jupiter as a comet or comet-like object and passed near Earth. An actual collision is not mentioned. The object allegedly changed Earth's orbit and axis, causing innumerable catastrophes that were mentioned in early mythologies and religions from around the world. So the core ideas are Worlds in Collision is a book of wars in the celestial spheres that took place in historical times. In these wars, the planet Earth participated too. The historical cosmology story of this book is based in the evidence of historical texts of many people around the globe, on classical literature, on epics of the northern race, on sacred books of the peoples of the Orient and Occident, on traditions and folklore of primitive peoples, an old astronomical inscription and charts, on astrological finds, and also on geological and paleontological material. The book proposes that around 15th century BCE, Venus was ejected from Jupiter as a comet or comet-like object and subsequently passed near Earth, though an actual collision with the Earth is not mentioned. So in doing so, it changed Earth's orbit and axial inclination, causing innumerable catastrophes which were identified in early mythologies and religious traditions from human civilization around the world. 52 years later, it again made a close approach, stopping the Earth's rotation for a while and causing more catastrophes. When in 8th and 7th centuries BCE, Mars itself, displaced by Venus, made close approaches to the Earth. This incident caused a new round of disturbances and disasters. After that, the current celestial order was established, courses of the planets stabilized over the centuries, and Venus gradually became a normal planet. So what I'm suggesting is that there's a link between Venus and the Torrid meteor showers and Hathor. And I think that what the message in this is that whatever caused the Torrid meteor shower also caused Venus to come into our solar system. Whether it came from Jupiter or not, I'm not sure. But, in the Randell Carlson video, we have the explanation of it being from Taurus, the bull, the Pleiades, is because in October, November, around the time of Halloween, we have what looks like a meteor shower coming from this region of the sky. So it's not necessarily coming from the Pleiades or from Taurus constellation. It just every year appears in that position. So it's connected to them in that way. So now with this information in mind, we come back to this Freemasonic Jacob's Ladder picture. And, we know here in the middle, this is Venus, the bright morning star, Lucifer. And we have on the right side here, or my right side here, the moon with the 7 stars of the 7 sisters or the Pleiades. So you can count the stars there. There's 7. On the left side, we have the sun. So together, the Pleiades and the moon and the sun, we have Venus. And Venus is the star that caused quite possibly the deluge or the flood of Noah. So according to space.com, Venus can have comet-like atmosphere. Planet Venus sometimes looks less like a planet and more like a comet, scientists say. Scientists with the European Space Agency have discovered that a part of the upper atmosphere of Venus, its ionosphere, acts surprisingly different depending on daily changes in the sun's weather. The side of Venus's ionosphere that faces away from the sun can billow outward like a tail of a comet, while the side facing the star remains tightly compacted, researchers said. So how do we know that Venus doesn't just do this anyway when it's reacting to a certain phase of the sun? We can't know that. And it's possible that in this time of people seeing this Venus comet, that the sun was in a certain cycle that caused Venus to flare. And when we look in the video and the tradition of Halloween, the Day of the Dead, the returning of the dead, I have a sneaking suspicion that this time of year, the meteor showers from the Torrids may actually be the time of the final judgment. And why do I say that? Is because the celebrations of the Day of the Dead and the worship of the ancestors or the Antediluvian people as being evil people or bad spirits, demons coming back. And then we have the resurrection of the dead at the end of time, and the spirits coming back and the veil being lifted. In the Halloween story, we have the thinning of the veil between the material world and the spiritual world at this time of year. Now, I know this is just a mythology, and being Christian, it's a pagan corruption or mythology, but that doesn't mean it doesn't have some real historical context to it. And I think that, Jesus says, or the Bible tells us, as in the days of Noah, that people will be given in marriage and getting married, and then the flood came. And, as in the days of Noah, if in the days of Noah this flood came in the time period between late October and early November, where all of these people died, these ancestors died, and I believe it's possible that Nimrod resurrected the worship of the ancestors in this Freemasonic system we can see here. The way back to heaven is the Lucifer through Venus. It's possible that what Jesus is telling us here is, I am the bright morning star. I am the way back to heaven. And during my return, I will come back at this time point, the same celestial point that was the same time in the days of Noah. So in this scripture it says, Matthew 24:37-39, "But as the days of Noah were, so shall also the coming of the Son of Man be. For as in the days that were before the flood, they were eating and drinking, marrying and giving in marriage, until the day that Noah entered into the ark, and knew not until the flood came, and took them all away, so shall also the coming of the Son of Man be." So in Revelation 22, it says, "He that is unjust, let him be unjust still, and he which is filthy, let him be filthy still. And he that is righteous, let him be righteous still, and he that is holy, let him be holy still. And behold, I come quickly, and my reward is with me, to give every man according to his work shall be. I am Alpha and Omega, and the beginning and the end, the first and the last. Blessed are they that do his commandments, that they may have right to the tree of life, and may enter in through the gates into the city. For without are dogs, and sorcerers, and whoremongers, and murderers, and idolaters, and whosoever loveth and maketh a lie. I, Jesus, have sent mine angel to testify unto you these things in the churches. I am the root and the offspring of David, and the bright and morning star." So is Jesus telling us here that in these times, let the people who are like the people of the Antediluvian pre-flood people be filthy, let the people like Noah be righteous, because he's coming quickly, and he's the beginning, he's the end, and he's coming to give at the end the resurrection. Is it at this time that we have the Torrid meteor shower, when the Pleiades are in the sky, the end of October, early November, the Day of the Dead, the day of the resurrection of all souls? I don't know, it's possible. In the Roman Catholic tradition, we have All Souls Day. I don't know much about this personally. Also known as the commemoration of all the faithful departed, and the Day of the Dead is a day of prayer and remembrance for the faithful departed, which is observed by Roman Catholics and other Christian denominations annually on the 2nd of November. All Souls Day is often celebrated in Western Christianity. Saturday of Souls is a related tradition more frequently observed in Eastern Christianity. Adherents of All Souls Day tradition often remember deceased friends and relatives in various ways on the day. Through prayer, intercession, alms, and visits to cemeteries, people commemorate the poor souls in purgatory and gain them indulgences. Beliefs and practices associated with All Souls Day vary widely among Christian denominations. So the annual celebration is the last day of All Hallowtide after All Saints Day, 1st of November, and Halloween, October 31st. Now, I'm not promoting this day as a good day, or that it's something that isn't or wasn't used as a pagan as a day of human sacrifice. And what I'm saying is it was a day of ignorance. And, we have this message of human sacrifice. Was it a corruption of a prior knowledge that God would sacrifice his son for us, a life to cover our soul in the resurrection? And this paganization of this day, the worship of the ancestors, which I believe may have been started by Nimrod, and this Babylonian mystery religion as an inversion of what really happened. So this winged disc symbol, I think it's what it means is it refers to Venus. We know that the Star of Inanna in Venus and the goddess cult is quite possibly showing us what caused the Great Flood, and their inversion of this through freemasonry is the way back to heaven, the way back to Eden through the Kabbalah is somehow to get back to a pre-flood state, to worship the ancestors, to celebrate the ancestors, rather than to see them for what they were, which was wicked. And I think that in the time of Nimrod, we know that he was the descendant of Ham, and we know that Ham was wicked. Ham was one of the wicked sons of Noah, and I think that quite possibly what the Bible is telling us is that the descendants of Ham, Nimrod, re-established the Antediluvian religion and system. They were the giants of the earth, or the Nephilim, or they tried to make themselves the Nephilim, the mighty men, the hunters, the hero,